When the front line bisected Europe, another war began in the enemy's rear, invisible yet no less significant. In the forests and mountain gorges, in the villages and small towns of the occupied territories, a special form of international relations was born: partisan diplomacy. Without official credentials or diplomatic passports, commanders of Soviet partisan detachments became true plenipotentiaries of their country, establishing ties with Polish, Czech, and other resistance groups. These contacts, born in dugouts by the light of kerosene lamps, sometimes proved more effective than official negotiations. Through impassable forests and swamps, bypassing German garrisons, partisan liaisons carried not only reports, but also the foundations of future international agreements. In conditions where any meeting could be the last, a special trust was forged between people of different nationalities, united by a common goal: the fight against Nazism. Thus, in the fire of war, the Brotherhood of Nations was forged, which subsequently determined the post-war structure of Eastern Europe. The partisan movement did not emerge in an instant. Its roots go back to the first days of the war, when thousands of people found themselves cut off from the main forces of the Red Army. In the summer of 1941, when Nazi troops were rapidly advancing through the territory of the Soviet Union, not only scattered groups of encircled soldiers remained in their rear, but also local residents who were unwilling to tolerate the occupation. Similar processes occurred in Poland after September 1939, and in Czechoslovakia after its dismemberment. The first contacts between partisans of different nationalities often arose by chance. Soviet detachment commander Dmitry Medvedev recalled how in the Bryansk forests his fighters stumbled upon a group of Poles who had escaped from a concentration camp. Exhausted, they initially mistook the Soviet partisans for a German raid. Mutual distrust dissipated only after several hours of tense negotiations. But it was this chance encounter that laid the foundation for cooperation, which subsequently saved hundreds of lives. In Belarus, where the partisan movement acquired a truly mass character, interaction with the Polish underground was more complex. Political contradictions, exacerbated by the events of 1939, created an atmosphere of suspicion. However, a common enemy and the daily struggle for survival forced them to seek common ground. Fyodor Markin, commander of the Chapayev Partisan Brigade, recounted a meeting with a representative of the Polish Home Army in an abandoned forest lodge near Grodno. We spoke in whispers, by the light of a homemade oil lamp. Everyone feared provocation. But when we unrolled the map and began discussing the location of German garrisons, distrust receded. At that moment, much more united us than divided. Czech anti-fascists also sought contact with Soviet partisans. In Moravia, where detachments of the Czech resistance operated, the first links were established through Soviet soldiers who had escaped captivity. They became living bridges between different groups of fighters against the occupiers. Their knowledge of the language and local conditions proved invaluable. Radio operators played a special role in establishing international partisan contacts. A radio station hidden in a peasant house or a forest dugout became a real diplomatic channel. Not only military reports but also proposals for cooperation were transmitted over the air, and joint operations were coordinated. It is noteworthy that the national composition of the partisan detachments themselves was often international. Ukrainians and Russians, Belarusians and Poles, Jews and Slovaks fought in Kovpak's brigade. This multinationality became a natural basis for expanding international contacts. The structure of the Soviet partisan movement gradually evolved from disparate detachments to a centralized system with a clear hierarchy. In May 1942, the central headquarters of the partisan movement was established, headed by Panteleimon Ponomarenko, which coordinated the actions of partisans throughout the occupied territory. Later, frontline and Republican headquarters were formed, responsible for specific regions. This vertical management allowed for the coordination of partisan actions with the operations of the regular army and ensured they were supplied with everything necessary. However, a characteristic feature of partisan warfare always remained the significant autonomy of local detachments. Commanders made decisions based on the specific circumstances, often without the possibility of receiving instructions from above. It was this autonomy that created a unique situation where an ordinary detachment commander became, in essence, a plenipotentiary representative of the Soviet Union in international contacts. The directives of the central headquarters of the partisan movement explicitly indicated the need to establish ties with anti-fascist groups of other nationalities. For example, in an instruction sent to the Belarusian headquarters of the partisan movement in October 1943, it stated, "To fully promote the unification of efforts of all patriotic forces, regardless of nationality, to fight the common enemy." Alexander Flegontov, commander of the partisan brigade for the motherland, recalled receiving a radiogram with the task of establishing contact with Polish underground fighters in the Białystok area. The instructions were extremely laconic: find, agree, coordinate actions. How to do this under conditions of total surveillance and a language barrier, no one explained. We had to improvise. In some cases, the initiative came from the commanders themselves. The legendary Sidor Kovpak, who led a raid through the Carpathians, independently decided to interact with local Slovak and Hungarian anti-fascists. This decision was not coordinated with the central headquarters, but it fully justified itself. Thanks to local guides, the detachment was able to overcome the most difficult mountain passes and fulfill its combat mission. The story of Viktor Karasev, commander of the Suvorov detachment, is noteworthy. Operating in the western regions of Belarus, he established contact with a Polish Home Army group commanded by Lieutenant Czesław Zajączkowski. Despite political differences, they managed to agree on joint actions against German garrisons and the exchange of intelligence. When Karasev reported this to headquarters, he received the reply, "Act according to the situation. The main thing is the effectiveness of the fight against the enemy." Detachment commanders received special powers to conduct negotiations. They were issued mandates signed by the leadership of the partisan movement and sometimes by representatives of the Soviet government. Such a document, even if written on an ordinary piece of paper in a forest dugout, had enormous psychological significance in contacts with foreign resistance groups. Relations between Soviet partisans and the Polish underground represent a complex and contradictory page in the history of World War II. Political antagonism, rooted in the events of 1939, created an atmosphere of mutual distrust. The Home Army, subordinate to the Polish government in exile, and Soviet partisans often viewed each other not only as allies against a common enemy, but also as potential adversaries in the post-war arrangement of Eastern Europe. In the territories of Western Belarus and Western Ukraine, which became part of the USSR before the war, these contradictions manifested particularly acutely. Vasily Korj, commander of the partisan brigade People's Avengers, recalled, "During our first contacts with the Poles, we felt a chill of distrust. They saw in us not only fighters against the Nazis, but also representatives of the power that had changed the borders of their homeland. However, common danger and the necessity of survival gradually brought positions closer. A notable incident occurred in the Naliboki forest in the summer of 1943. A detachment commanded by Grigory Sidorok encountered a Polish unit led by Lieutenant Adolf Pilch, pseudonym Góra. After intense negotiations lasting several days, the commanders agreed on a delineation of responsibilities and an exchange of intelligence. "We sat at one table, a Soviet partisan and a Polish officer," Sidorok wrote in his memoirs. "Between us lay pistols and a map, crisscrossed with lines of German communications. Distrust gradually gave way to the understanding that separately we were doomed, but together we could inflict significant damage on the enemy." A different picture was presented by relations with the People's Army, Armia Ludowa, a Polish left-wing partisan organization created on the initiative of Polish communists. Here, ideological proximity facilitated interaction. The commander of the Soviet formation, Alexander Saburov, established close contacts with People's Army units under the leadership of Michał Rola-Ziemierski. Through joint efforts, they carried out several successful operations against German garrisons in Nyněways, Lublin area. Liaisons played a special role in establishing contacts, people who spoke Polish and were familiar with local conditions. Often, these were local residents of Jewish nationality, escaping Nazi genocide in partisan detachments. Their motivation was extremely clear: to unite all anti-fascist forces for the quickest possible defeat of the common enemy. In border areas, mixed Soviet-Polish groups were often formed. Nikolai Prokopiuk, commander of the Kutuzov detachment, recalled how Ukrainians, Russians, and Poles fought side by side in his unit. When a person goes on a mission, risking his life, nationality takes a back seat. Only one thing matters: can he be relied upon in battle? Gradually, partisan diplomacy bore fruit. By the end of 1943, regular interaction between Soviet and Polish partisans had been established in many parts of the occupied territory. The exchange of intelligence, coordination of strikes against enemy communications, joint resistance to punitive operations, all this increased the effectiveness of the fight against the occupiers. In the forests of Moravia and the mountains of Slovakia, partisan diplomacy took on a special character. Here, in the lands of historical Czechoslovakia, Soviet partisans found fertile ground for cooperation. The Czech and Slovak peoples, suffering under the Nazi yoke, saw in the Soviet partisans not only allies in the struggle, but also hope for the revival of their statehood. The first contacts with Czech resistance groups were often established through local residents. In the mountain villages of Moravia, peasants, risking their lives, sheltered Soviet scouts and liaisons. Local teacher Josef Novak, from a small settlement near Brno, became one of the first guides between the Soviet detachment Buria, Storm, under the command of Major Dmitry Rizzuto, and a Czech underground group. When we first met representatives of the Czech resistance, Rizzuto later recalled, we were struck by their organization and determination. Despite the brutal repression after the assassination attempt on Heydrich, they continued the struggle and sought contacts with us. Cooperation with the Jan Žižka partisan detachment, operating in the Vsetín area, proved especially fruitful. The commander of the Soviet airborne detachment, Dmitry Vasilyev, established direct radio communication with this group in November 1944. Thanks to coordinated actions, a series of successful sabotages were carried out on railway lines connecting Germany with the Eastern Front. The most important element of partisan diplomacy was the establishment of trust. The commander of the Soviet detachment, Death to Fascism, Ivan Petrov, used an interesting method. At the first meeting with Czech partisans, he demonstratively left his weapons and came to negotiations only with a radio operator and an interpreter. This gesture of trust made a strong impression on the Czechs, who were accustomed to the constant threat of provocations from the Gestapo. In the mountains of Slovakia, Soviet partisans actively supported the Slovak national uprising, which began in August 1944. Airborne groups under the command of Alexei Velichko established contacts with local insurgent detachments, supplied them with weapons, ammunition, and, no less importantly, combat experience. The Czechs and Slovaks learned from us how to mine roads and derail trains, Velichko wrote in his memoirs, and we adopted their methods of conspiracy and working with the population. They knew every path in the mountains, every reliable person in the villages. The language barrier was overcome in various ways. In the Alexander Nevsky detachment, operating on the border of Moravia and Slovakia, a special liaison group was created, which included fighters who spoke Slavic languages.
In addition, simple phrase books, compiled by the partisans themselves, were used. It is noteworthy that in a number of cases, Soviet commanders received special powers to negotiate with the Czech underground directly from Moscow. For example, Captain Jan Nalepka, a Slovak by nationality who fought in a Soviet partisan formation, had a special mandate to establish contacts with Czechoslovak anti-fascists. Joint operations of Soviet and Czech partisans often became a model of international cooperation behind enemy lines. In April 1945, a combined detachment under the command of Soviet officer Ivan Kononov and Czech underground fighter Miroslav Picha attacked a German convoy near Olomouc. Captured weapons and ammunition were divided equally between Soviet and Czech fighters. In the enemy's rear, communication between partisan detachments of different nationalities transformed into a true art of survival. Invisible threads of communication stretched through forests and mountains, connecting people speaking different languages but united by a common goal. Every contact, every message transfer was fraught with mortal danger, demanding the development of special methods of conspiracy and information encryption. Initially, communication between Soviet, Polish, and Czech partisans was carried out through trusted couriers, local residents who knew the territory well. They moved disguised as peasants, merchants, or even collaborators, skillfully masking the true purpose of their movements. Courier Maria Osipova, who worked in Minsk, recalled, "A system of passwords and identifying marks became an integral part of partisan diplomacy. When representatives of different detachments met, complex combinations of questions and answers were used, often based on folk proverbs or literary quotes. The commander of the Soviet detachment, quote, Viktor Liagin, developed a system whereby Polish and Soviet partisans recognized each other by a special way of folding a scarf or the arrangement of buttons on clothing. Radio communication became a revolutionary breakthrough in partisan communication. Small, portable radios dropped from airplanes allowed for constant contact between detachments located at significant distances from each other. Complex ciphers, changed weekly, were used for transmitting messages. Radio operator Nadezhda Troyan, who worked in a mixed Soviet-Polish detachment, created a unique coding system based on the works of Adam Mickiewicz, understandable to both Poles and Russians. Cache sites played a special role, specially equipped places for transmitting information and material assets without personal contact. In hollow trees, under stones, in abandoned buildings, partisans left reports, maps, medicines, and ammunition. Each cache had its own identifying mark, known only to the initiated. In the forests of Belovezhskaya Puszcha, where both Polish and Soviet detachments operated, an entire network of such caches was created, allowing for coordination of actions without direct meetings. Overcoming the language barrier required unconventional solutions. People who spoke several languages were highly valued in partisan detachments. They became not just translators, but also cultural intermediaries, helping to understand the mentality of their allies. The commander of the Czechoslovak detachment, Jan Nalepka,
and the Soviet officer Alexei Fedorov developed a simplified dictionary of military terms in Russian, Czech, and Polish, which was distributed among fighters of international groups. Underground printing presses published leaflets and newspapers in various languages, becoming another channel of communication. In Slovakia, the, quote, printing press operated, printing materials in Russian, Slovak, and Czech. These publications not only informed about the situation at the front, but also contained instructions for the interaction of partisans of different nationalities. The story of the quote, a system for transmitting messages through shepherd children, is noteworthy. In the border regions of Belarus and Poland, local boys who herded cattle became indispensable couriers. They transmitted notes encrypted as children's drawings or wrapped in candy wrappers. The Germans rarely paid attention to children, which made this communication channel particularly reliable. In conditions of constant threat of betrayal, partisans developed a system for verifying new contacts. Before entrusting important information to a representative of another detachment, they were checked through a series of small assignments, or asked to provide information that could be cross-checked. Only after this was full-fledged communication established. In guerrilla warfare, linguistic and cultural barriers became an obstacle no less serious than enemy lines. When Soviet, Polish, and Czech resistance fighters gathered in a common clearing, the first challenge was simply understanding each other. Slavic languages, despite their closeness, are still different enough to create difficulties in communication, especially when it came to planning military operations, where any inaccuracy could cost dozens of lives. Translators in partisan detachments were worth their weight in gold. Often, this role was performed by local teachers, students, or people who had lived in neighboring countries before the war. The commander of the Iskra detachment, Ivan Zolotar, recalled, "Our salvation was the former gymnasium teacher Mikhail Stepanovich. Before the war, he lived in Warsaw for 5 years and spoke Polish fluently. Without him, our meetings with the home army simply would not have taken place." In the absence of professional translators, partisans developed simplified language systems, a kind of wartime pidgin. Brief phrase books were created with basic military terms and phrases in different languages. Partisan commander Viktor Korzik described one such dictionary. "We compiled a notebook with 3 columns, Russian, Polish, and Czech words. There were no more than 200 terms there, but it was enough for basic understanding." It is interesting that in mixed detachments, a special dialect gradually formed, incorporating elements of different Slavic languages. The Polish partisan Jan Przybylski, who fought in a Soviet-Polish formation, wrote in his memoirs, "By the end of '44, we spoke a strange mixture of Russian and Polish. It was our own partisan language, incomprehensible to pure Russians or pure Poles." Nonverbal means of communication played an equally important role. To convey complex tactical plans, diagrams, drawings on the ground, and models made from improvised materials were used. The commander of the Czech detachment, Miroslav Pík, recounted how, before a joint operation with Soviet partisans, the plan of attack on the German garrison was modeled using cones, branches, and stones laid out on the stump of a felled tree. Common cultural roots of Slavic peoples facilitated mutual understanding. Songs, fairy tales, and proverbs became bridges between different nationalities. Soviet partisan Anna Morozova recalled an evening in the camp where Polish and Soviet fighters took turns singing their folk songs. The melodies were different, but the pain and hope in them sounded the same. After such an evening, we understood each other without words. Religious differences also had to be overcome. Many Poles and Czechs were Catholics, while Soviet partisans grew up in an atheistic state. The commander of the Burevestnik detachment, Nikolai Korolov, described how, during a joint operation with a Polish detachment, they stopped for a rest in an abandoned chapel. The Polish comrades prayed before the operation. Our fighters initially looked with bewilderment, then began to treat it with respect. In the end, we all asked for one thing: for victory. Shared trials and dangers brought people closer together faster than years of peaceful life.
Wounded Czech partisan Joseph Novak, who was nursed by a Soviet nurse who didn't know a word of Czech, later wrote, "She spoke to me with her eyes and hands." When someone saves your life, language doesn't matter. In some cases, cultural differences became not an obstacle, but an advantage. Different approaches to solving tactical problems enriched partisan strategy. Soviet commanders valued the methodicalness and organization of Czech underground fighters, and they, in turn, adopted Russian resourcefulness and the ability to improvise in critical situations. Chapter 8.
Joint Combat Operations, Planning and Implementation. At dawn on June 27, 1944, a meeting took place in the forests near Rovno that went down in the history of the partisan movement. The commander of the Soviet unit, Hunters, Dmitry Medvedev, and the leader of the Polish Home Army Detachment, Robert Satanovsky, agreed on a plan for a joint operation to blow up a railway bridge across the Horin River. This bridge was of strategic importance. Trains with reinforcements for the German Army Group Center, against which Operation Bagration was unfolding, passed over it.
"We sat at a makeshift table in a dugout," Medvedev later recalled.
A kerosene lamp hung over us, illuminating the map. Satanovsky, a former officer of the Polish army, proposed an unexpected solution: to attack not the bridge itself, which was heavily guarded, but a railway station 5 kilometers away. This was supposed to distract the main guard forces. The operation plan provided for a clear division of tasks. The Polish group, which knew the terrain better, provided reconnaissance and cover. Soviet partisans, who had more experience in demolition work, prepared and set the charges. Through joint efforts, they managed to blow up not only the bridge, but also 2 trains with enemy equipment and personnel. An equally illustrative example of partisan diplomacy in action was the operation in Moravia in March 1945. A Soviet airborne detachment, commanded by Captain Alexei Velichko, established contact with the Czech resistance group Death to Fascism. The Czech commander František Bedřich proposed a joint attack on an ammunition depot in the Vsetin area. The Czechs knew the security system and guard changes perfectly, Velichko wrote in his report. We, on the other hand, had experienced saboteurs and the necessary explosives. By combining our efforts, we were able to inflict damage on the enemy that would have been impossible with separate actions. The operation was planned taking into account the strengths of each group. Czech fighters, who had worked at local enterprises before the war, were responsible for infiltrating the depot territory. Soviet partisans provided fire cover and blew up the main targets. The result was the destruction of a depot with 3,000 aerial bombs and shells, which seriously undermined the combat effectiveness of German units in the region. In Slovakia, during the national uprising of 1944, Soviet-Slovak cooperation reached its highest level. The Stefanik Partisan Brigade, in which Slovaks and Soviet paratroopers fought, carried out a series of coordinated strikes against German garrisons in the Va River Valley. "We developed a system of coordinated actions," recalled the commander of the Soviet group, Vasily Karasev. Slovak comrades attacked from the front, drawing the main enemy forces to themselves. At this time, our sabotage group mined the Germans' retreat routes and struck from the rear. This tactic allowed them to liberate several settlements with minimal losses and capture significant trophies. Small arms, ammunition, and even several light tanks which were then used in partisan operations. In the Belowejskaya Puszcza, on the border of modern Belarus and Poland, several mixed Soviet-Polish detachments operated. They developed a unique system of roaming ambushes on the roads connecting German garrisons. Small mobile groups, consisting of Soviet and Polish fighters, constantly changed their locations, delivering sudden strikes and quickly retreating into the forest. The commander of the Polish group, Stanislav Skowronski, noted, "The Russians taught us to act boldly, not to be afraid to engage in battle with superior enemy forces. We, in turn, showed them forest paths and places where they could safely hide after the operation." The effectiveness of joint actions was confirmed by concrete results. In 3 months of 1944, mixed Soviet-Polish groups in the Belowejskaya Puszcza area derailed 23 trains, destroyed 7 tanks and armored vehicles, and routed 14 police stations. The German command was forced to withdraw regular units from the front to fight the partisans, which facilitated the advance of the Red Army. Chapter 9. Exchange of Intelligence, Information, and Military Experience. In partisan warfare, intelligence became an invaluable resource, often more important than weapons and ammunition. The creation of an effective system for collecting and exchanging intelligence information between partisan formations of different nationalities became one of the most significant achievements of partisan diplomacy. This invisible front required no less heroism than open combat operations. In early 1943, a unique intelligence network was established in western Belarus, uniting Soviet and Polish units. The commander of the Soviet Brigade for the Motherland, Fyodor Markov, and the representative of the Polish Home Army, Lieutenant Czesław Zajączkowski, agreed on a regular exchange of data on the movements of German troops. Every 3 days, their liaisons met at agreed-upon locations and exchanged encrypted reports. Information received from our Polish comrades helped us prevent a punitive operation against our base, Markov wrote in his diary. They reported the exact time the punitive detachment would advance and its strength. We were able to prepare an ambush and deliver a preemptive strike. In Czechoslovakia, intelligence exchange became systematic after the landing of Soviet airborne groups in the spring of 1944. The commander of the Czech unit, Death to Fascism, Miroslav Sirovi, created a special group of local residents who worked at railway stations and in administrative institutions. They recorded the movement of military trains, the quantity and type of equipment being transported, and the location of headquarters and warehouses. This information was transmitted to Soviet partisans, who, using portable radio stations, sent it to the central headquarters of the partisan movement. From there, the information went to the General Staff, where it was used in planning operations of the regular army. For example, data on the movement of the SS Viking tank division through the territory of Slovakia, collected by local underground fighters and transmitted through Soviet partisans, allowed the Soviet command to prepare for repelling an enemy counterattack during the Lvov-Sandomierz operation. An equally important aspect of cooperation was the exchange of tactical methods and combat experience. Soviet partisans, who by 1943 had significant experience in sabotage work, shared their skills with their Polish and Czech allies. In the forests of Belowejskaya Puszcza, unique training centers were organized where Soviet sappers and demolition experts trained Polish fighters in the manufacture of improvised explosive devices and their tactical application. The Russians taught us how to make mines from improvised materials, recalled Polish partisan Tadeusz Kowalski. They showed how to use captured German shells to make landmines, how to disguise charges as household items. This knowledge saved our lives and helped us inflict significant damage on the enemy. In turn, Czech and Slovak underground fighters, many of whom were engineers and technicians before the war, shared their knowledge of industrial facilities and communications with Soviet partisans. They helped identify the most vulnerable points in factories and power plants that worked for the German war machine. A notable story is that of the Slovak engineer Jan Nalepka, who defected to the Soviet partisans and became the commander of an international detachment. His technical knowledge allowed him to develop an effective system for blowing up high-voltage power lines that supplied military factories in the Brno region. In one night, Nalepka's detachment disabled the power supply of 3 enterprises, paralyzing their work for 2 weeks. In the Polish city of Lublin, an underground group led by Grzegorz Korczynski set up the production of detonators for mines in the basement of an abandoned house. The technology was transferred to Soviet partisans operating in neighboring areas. This helped solve the acute problem of a shortage of detonators, which were difficult to obtain from the mainland. The exchange of military instructors became another form of cooperation. Experienced sappers, radio operators, and reconnaissance officers were sent from Soviet partisan formations to Polish and Czech units. They not only shared their experience, but also helped plan and conduct combat operations. In turn, guides and liaisons from the local population who knew the territory and customs joined Soviet units. The commander of the Soviet sabotage group Olympus, Kirill Orlovsky, recalled, "The Polish forester, Jan Kowalczyk, became our eyes and ears. He knew every path in the forest, every ford across the river. Thanks to him, we could move unnoticed by the enemy and suddenly appear where we were not expected." In the conditions of guerrilla warfare, the question of survival was often decided not only by the availability of weapons and ammunition, but also by an effective system of logistical support. When supply lines stretched for hundreds of kilometers through occupied territories, mutual assistance between detachments of different nationalities became the key to the success of the common cause. Partisan diplomacy manifested itself not only in joint combat operations, but also in the daily care for the urgent needs of the resistance fighters. In the territory of the Białowieża forest, where both Soviet and Polish detachments operated, by the autumn of 1943, a unique system of joint supply bases had been established. The commander of the Soviet brigade Elusive, Mikhail Sidorovich, and the leader of the Polish Home Army detachment, Jan Pivnik, agreed to combine resources. In a remote part of the forest, known only to the initiated, a secret warehouse was created where medicines, ammunition, and provisions were stored, accessible to both sides. "We established a simple but effective rule," Sidorovich later recalled. "Each detachment could take what was necessary from the warehouse in a critical situation, but was obliged to replenish supplies at the first opportunity." This was a true partisan economy based on trust and mutual assistance. Of particular value were the cargoes received from the mainland. Soviet partisan formations had a more established air supply system. Transport planes regularly delivered weapons, ammunition, medicines, and communication equipment to them. By an unwritten agreement between the commanders, a part of these supplies was transferred to Polish and Czech allies. The commander of the Czech detachment for freedom, Miroslav Pík, spoke about such a practice. "Russian comrades shared with us everything they received from the air. Once, they gave us 10 PPSH submachine guns and 2,000 cartridges, a real treasure in those days. In return, we provided them with intelligence and guides from the local population." In the mountains of Slovakia, where mixed Soviet-Slovak groups operated, a system for distributing trophies was established. After joint operations, weapons, ammunition, and equipment captured from the enemy were divided among the participants proportionally to the size of the detachments. This rule, proposed by the Soviet commander Alexei Velichko, helped to avoid conflicts and strengthened combat camaraderie. Medical mutual assistance became one of the most striking manifestations of partisan solidarity. In conditions where every pill counted and qualified medical care was a rarity, saving wounded comrades from other detachments became a matter of honor. In the Polish People's Army detachment under the command of Grzegorz Korczynski, a Dr. Tadeusz Bielinski worked, who had pre-war experience as a surgeon. Severely wounded partisans from Soviet detachments operating in neighboring areas were secretly brought to him. In an improvised hospital equipped in an abandoned forester's lodge, he performed dozens of complex operations that saved the lives of many fighters. The Soviet partisan detachment Budavestnik, in turn, organized a system for evacuating wounded Polish partisans by planes that arrived for their own wounded. The detachment commander Viktor Karasev recalled, "We never divided the wounded into ours and theirs. When the plane arrived, those who needed urgent hospitalization were sent first, regardless of their nationality." In the harsh winter of 1943, when German punitive forces carried out a large-scale operation against partisans in the Naliboki forest, a Polish detachment under the command of Adolf Pilch provided shelter to a group of Soviet partisans cut off from the main forces. For 3 weeks, the Poles shared their last provisions and warm clothes with them, risking their own safety. Mutual assistance was also manifested in the exchange of specialists. Soviet detachments, which had more fighters with military experience, sent instructors in mine demolition to Polish and Czech groups. In exchange, they received guides, experts in the terrain and language, which was critically important for survival in unfamiliar areas. Political work among the population of occupied territories was no less important a task than combat operations. Partisans of various nationalities understood that without the support of local residents, their struggle was doomed to failure. That is why multinational partisan groups paid special attention to agitation and propaganda activities, striving to counter the powerful Nazi propaganda machine and maintain the morale of the population. In the forests of Belarus, in the autumn of 1943, Soviet and Polish partisans established a joint underground printing house. Located in a dugout, carefully disguised as an ordinary forest hill, it operated around the clock. Leaflets and newspapers in Russian, Belarusian, and Polish were printed there. The commander of the Soviet detachment, Mikhail Shmiryov, known as Batka Minai, recalled, "Our printing house was a real weapon. The word sometimes struck the enemy harder than a bullet. When local residents saw that Russians and Poles were fighting together against the occupiers, it instilled hope in them and gave them strength." Multilingual publications proved particularly effective. The newspaper For Freedom, published in 3 languages, was distributed in both Belarusian and Polish villages in the borderland. It published not only Sovinform Bureau reports and news from the front, but also stories about joint operations of partisans of different nationalities, which emphasized the international character of the struggle against Nazism. In Czechoslovakia, Soviet Czech partisan groups developed a unique system of political work with the population. Each detachment created agitation brigades, including representatives of different nationalities. They held meetings in liberated villages, telling the truth about the situation at the front and exposing Nazi propaganda. Czech teacher Jaroslav Nimitz, who became a partisan agitator, wrote in his memoirs, "When our agitators, Czechs together with Russian comrades, came to a village, it made a huge impression on the local residents. People saw that we were not alone in the struggle, that a great country stood behind us." In the mountains of Slovakia, after the start of the Slovak national uprising, Soviet Slovak partisan detachments organized real rallies in liberated settlements. improvised tribunes, decorated with red flags and Slovak national symbols, were set up in the central squares of towns and villages. Both Soviet commanders and local underground fighters spoke. They talked about the situation at the front, about the atrocities of the occupiers, and called for unity in the struggle. The commander of the Slovak Soviet partisan formation, Jan Nalepka, recalled, "After such rallies, dozens of new fighters came to us. People saw that we were acting together, that Soviet comrades respected our national identity, and this inspired them to fight." Partisan artists and poets played a special role in political work. A real agitation collective was created in the Chapayev detachment, operating on the border of Poland and Belarus. Polish artist Tadeusz Kulasiewicz drew vivid caricatures of Hitler and his henchmen, and Soviet poet Alexei Surkov wrote captions for them, which were then translated into Polish. These leaflets were pasted up in occupied cities and infuriated the German authorities. In Moravia, a joint effort of Soviet and Czech partisans established the underground radio station Free Moravia. Broadcasting was conducted alternately in Czech and Russian. Radio operators transmitted not only news from the front, but also instructions for sabotage at enterprises working for the German war machine. Local residents secretly gathered in groups to listen to these broadcasts, despite the threat of severe penalties. Work with the youth of the occupied territories was particularly important. Soviet Polish partisan detachments created youth anti-fascist groups in villages, which distributed leaflets, collected information about the movements of German troops, and carried out minor acts of sabotage. The commander of the Polish People's Army detachment, Grzegorz Korzinski, wrote, "We understood that working with youth was working for the future. It was these young men and women who were to become the foundation of a new, free Poland after the war." Behind every successful operation, behind every victory over the enemy, stood specific individuals, commanders and liaison officers whose names are etched in golden letters into the history of the partisan movement. Their personal qualities, courage, and diplomatic talent allowed them to overcome national borders and unite disparate resistance groups into a single force. It was these people, often without special education or diplomatic experience, who became true ambassadors for their countries in the enemy's rear. One of the most striking figures in partisan diplomacy was Alexander Rabtsevich, commander of the, quote, Zero detachment, operating on the border of Belarus and Poland. Before the war, a modest mathematics teacher from a small Polesian town, he displayed an extraordinary talent as a negotiator. Fluent in Polish, Rabtsevich personally established contacts with 3 detachments of the Home Army, overcoming the initial distrust of their commanders. Quote 1 recalled Anna Morozova, a liaison officer from his detachment. In August 1943, Rabtsevich organized a meeting of Soviet and Polish detachment commanders in a forest lodge near the village of Rudniki. This meeting, which lasted 2 days, laid the foundation for coordinating the actions of all partisan forces in the region. Alexander's life ended in January 1944. He died in battle with punitive forces, covering the retreat of his fighters and Polish comrades. No less significant a figure was Maria Fortis, a radio operator for a special forces detachment dropped into Slovakia in 1943. Fluent in Czech and Slovak, she became not just a liaison, but a true diplomat among the partisans. Through her radio, communication was maintained between the Soviet command and Slovak rebels, intelligence was transmitted, and joint operations were coordinated. "Masha was our voice on the air," wrote Jan Nalepka, commander of the Slovak detachment. Thanks to her impeccable work, we always felt connected to the wider world. We knew we weren't alone in our struggle. In September 1944, when German troops began suppressing the Slovak national uprising, Maria Fortis organized the evacuation of wounded partisans to the Soviet rear. She personally accompanied the transport of the wounded across the front line, demonstrating exceptional courage and resourcefulness. A special role in the development of international partisan cooperation was played by Kirill Prokofyevich Orlovsky, commander of the sabotage group Sokoli, Falcons. Having experience working in Spain during the Civil War, he perfectly understood the importance of international ties. In 1943, his group operated in the Białystok region, where it established contacts with Polish underground fighters. Orlovsky developed a unique system of interaction, whereby Soviet and Polish partisans exchanged not only information, but also fighters. 2 or 3 Soviet sappers demolition experts were sent to each Polish detachment, and Polish guides and scouts were included in Soviet groups. This allowed for the combination of the technical skills of Soviet specialists with the deep knowledge of the terrain possessed by Polish partisans. The partisan movement, which united people of different nationalities, inevitably faced internal contradictions. Behind the romantic aura of joint struggle lay complex human relationships, burdened by historical grievances, ideological differences, and simply everyday difficulties. The ability to overcome these conflicts became a true art of partisan diplomacy. In the Belovetskaya Pushcha in the winter of 1943, a clash occurred between the Soviet Chapayev detachment and a Polish Home Army group. The cause was a dispute over the distribution of provisions collected in nearby villages. Polish commander Stefan Dombrowski accused the Soviet partisans of taking too much from local peasants, most of whom were ethnically Polish. It was an explosive situation, recalled Ivan Petrov, commissar of the Soviet detachment. Both sides took up arms. One more minute, and we could have started shooting at each other, not at the Germans. The authority of Vasily Chernyshev, commander of a neighboring Soviet detachment, respected by both sides, helped resolve the conflict. He proposed creating a joint food collection commission, which included representatives from both Soviet and Polish partisans. The commission established supply norms for each village, taking into account its capabilities, and distributed the collected provisions among the detachments proportionally to the number of fighters. This simple mechanism relieved the tension, Chernyshev wrote in his report to headquarters. Moreover, joint work in the commission brought our fighters closer, helping them to understand each other better. Ideological differences often became a source of distrust between Soviet partisans and Home Army detachments, which were subordinate to the Polish government in London. Fyodor Markov, commander of the For the Motherland Brigade, spoke of difficult negotiations with the Polish underground. They looked at us with suspicion, seeing in Soviet partisans not only allies against Hitler, but also representatives of a power that could threaten the independence of future Poland. The common struggle became the decisive argument in overcoming such contradictions. After a joint operation to derail a German train near Lida station, relations between the detachments noticeably improved. When you risk your life together, political differences fade into the background, noted Polish officer Czesław Zajaczkowski. What becomes most important is how reliable your comrade is in battle. In the Slovak mountains in the autumn of 1944, a different kind of conflict arose. Alexei Velichko, commander of a Soviet airborne detachment, and Vilém Zingor, leader of the Slovak partisans, disagreed on tactics. The Soviet commander insisted on active sabotage against German communications, while the Slovak considered the protection of civilians from punitive operations a priority. We argued until we were hoarse, Velichko recalled. Each was convinced of his righteousness. An unexpected German raid resolved the situation. We were forced to act together, forgetting our differences. After successfully repelling the attack, the commanders found a compromise. Some forces were allocated for sabotage work, and some for protecting villages that supported the partisans. This experience showed the importance of a flexible approach and consideration of local conditions. Personal conflicts were also not uncommon in the partisan environment. Miroslav Pík, commander of a Czech detachment, and Soviet officer Dmitry Razuto, operating in the Moravia region, initially failed to find common ground due to differences in character and leadership approaches. The Czech preferred collegial decision-making, while the Soviet officer was accustomed to sole command.
Nikolai Semenov, commissar of the Soviet detachment, helped resolve the conflict by proposing a clear demarcation of responsibilities. Czech partisans were responsible for reconnaissance and communication with the population, while Soviet partisans were responsible for planning combat operations and preparing sabotage. At the same time, all key decisions were made jointly at the Military Council, where both sides had an equal voice. The influence of partisan diplomacy on the post-war order of Eastern Europe proved to be far more significant than one might have assumed in the midst of hostilities. The connections forged in forest, dugouts, and mountain shallows became the foundation for a new system of international relations after the victory over Nazism. Former partisans, having passed through the school of multinational cooperation, occupied important positions in the state and diplomatic structures of their countries. At the first post-war meeting of representatives from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union in Moscow in June 1945, among the delegates were many who knew each other from their joint struggle behind enemy lines. Former commander of a Soviet partisan unit, Vasily Kozlov, who became Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Byelorussian SSR, met Grzegorz Korczynski in the Polish delegation, with whom he had once planned operations against German garrisons. "We embraced like brothers," Kozlov later recalled, "and although we were now in diplomatic suits instead of partisan jackets, we understood each other perfectly. That experience of mutual trust that we acquired in the forests of the Belovezhskaya Pushcha helped resolve the most complex issues of interstate relations." In Czechoslovakia, many former partisans who had fought side by side with Soviet comrades joined the new government. Ludvík Svoboda, who led Czechoslovak military formations in the USSR and closely cooperated with the partisan movement, became Minister of Defense and then President of the country. His personal connections with Soviet commanders, established during the war years, contributed to strengthening friendly relations between the countries. The symbolic significance of partisan brotherhood was actively used in the official propaganda of the socialist bloc countries. Meetings of former partisans of different nationalities became important socio-political events. In 1960, the first international partisan rally was held in Minsk, attended by veterans from the USSR, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and other countries. Their recollections of the joint struggle formed the basis for numerous books, films, and exhibitions. In popular memory, the images of internationalist partisans held a special place. In the Belarusian village of Dalidovichi, a memorial was created in honor of a joint operation by Soviet and Polish partisans that saved local residents from a punitive expedition. Annually, meetings of veterans and youthful from both countries were held here, strengthening cultural and human ties between peoples. In Slovakia, the memory of Soviet partisans who fought alongside Slovak rebels is immortalized in numerous monuments and street names. The city of Banska Bystrica, which became the center of the Slovak national uprising, twinned with Russian Tula, the birthplace of many partisans who fought in the Slovak mountains. However, not all aspects of partisan cooperation received equal coverage in post-war historiography. Relations with the Home Army, subordinate to the Polish government in exile,
long remained a blank spot in official history. Only in the 1980s did research begin to emerge that objectively assessed the contribution of all participants in the anti-fascist resistance, regardless of their political views. Many former partisans continued to maintain personal contacts even during periods of cooling extension interstate relations. These informal ties, based on frontline brotherhood, sometimes played an important role in overcoming political disagreements. As one veteran noted, "When you shared the last piece of bread with someone in the partisan forest, no ideological barriers can stand between you." Economic cooperation between the socialist bloc countries also largely relied on the connections established during the war years. Joint ventures, scientific and technical projects, cultural exchange. In all these areas, people who had gone through the school of partisan diplomacy actively participated. Thus, the experience of inter-ethnic interaction, acquired in the extreme conditions of partisan warfare, became a valuable resource for the post-war order of Eastern Europe. It showed that people of different nationalities are capable of effective cooperation for a common goal, overcoming historical grievances and prejudices. This lesson retains its relevance today, reminding us that true diplomacy is built not only in official offices, but also in the daily interaction of ordinary people united by common values and aspirations. Partisan diplomacy left a profound mark on the history of the 20th century, becoming a unique phenomenon of international cooperation under extreme conditions. This experience, born in the fire of war, retains its relevance in the modern world, where the ability to find common ground with representatives of different cultures and traditions becomes a key skill for the survival of humanity. Summing up our research, it can be confidently asserted that partisan diplomacy became a school of international understanding, tested under the most severe conditions. When commanders of Soviet detachments established contacts with Polish and Czech resistance fighters, they acted not only as military strategists, but also as true diplomats, laying the foundations for future interstate relations. The special value of this experience lies in the fact that it was born not in the offices of professional diplomats, but in forest dugouts and mountain shelters, where people of different nationalities learned to trust each other, overcoming language barriers and historical prejudices. This people's diplomacy proved to be more effective than official negotiations in many cases, as it was built on personal contacts and concrete actions. The lessons of partisan diplomacy are particularly relevant for understanding modern conflicts. The experience of interaction behind enemy lines shows that even in the most difficult situations, dialogue and cooperation are possible if there is a common goal and mutual respect. Modern peacekeeping missions and humanitarian operations in conflict zones could learn much from the methods of partisan commanders who were able to find allies in the most unfavorable circumstances. In the historical memory of the peoples of Eastern Europe, partisan diplomacy occupies a special place. Despite all the political changes of recent decades, the images of internationalist partisans retain their significance as symbols of genuine brotherhood of peoples. In Belarus, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, monuments and memorials dedicated to the joint struggle against Nazism are carefully preserved. The study of partisan diplomacy helps to overcome simplistic ideas about the Second World War as a confrontation between monolithic blocs. In reality, the lines of division were much more complex, and human contacts were more multifaceted. A Soviet partisan could find common ground with a Polish underground fighter despite ideological differences, and a Czech worker could become a reliable ally of a Soviet intelligence officer. It is important to note that partisan diplomacy was not without contradictions and conflicts. Historical grievances, political disagreements, everyday difficulties All this created tension in relations between partisans of different nationalities. However, it is precisely the ability to overcome these contradictions, find compromises, and focus on a common goal that makes this experience particularly valuable for the present day. In an era of global challenges requiring international cooperation, partisan diplomacy reminds us of the possibility of cooperation even in the most adverse conditions. Climate change, pandemics, terrorism, these problems cannot be solved by the efforts of one country or a group of countries. They require the same spirit of solidarity and mutual assistance that partisans of different nationalities demonstrated, uniting against a common enemy. Thus, the study of partisan diplomacy is not only a tribute to a heroic past, but also a look into the future, where the ability to find allies and build bridges between different cultures becomes a key survival skill. This historical experience teaches us that true diplomacy is not only formal negotiations and the signing of treaties, but also the daily work of establishing human contacts based on mutual respect and common values.